Good day, students. This is the next video following on to the 3 videos that we did before on chapter 11. It has to do with the super keyword. Before we get to the super keyword, let me just go back a minute to the section on page 416 where you have one more, page 415. These square bullets will provide you with very useful and important information throughout the textbook, as you know from previous chapters. In this one, there's a summary, a key word here, or a little summary indicating what the paragraph is about from bullet to bullet. So, for instance, this one here, private data fields. Remember, we've mentioned before that private superclass from the subclasses, unless you use your getters, your get methods. But you can't directly communicate from the subclass with superclass private data fields. On the next page, the is a relationship. When you talk about inheritance, you are talking about the is a relationship. In other words, you can say that a rectangle, for instance, is a geometric object superclass. But here they warn you to be careful and not to make everything is a relationship. Think about it carefully. They advise you strongly to keep a square as a subclass of the geometric object superclass and not as a subclass of the rectangle class. So please read this section here. The next one also, the code inheritance blindly, focusing on common attributes. For instance, a person has an attribute of height and a tree as well. So you may think it's a common attribute, so let a tree subclass inherit from person. But if you apply the is a relationship, then it doesn't make sense to do that, because what you are saying is a person, because you are inheriting from the person superclass. So when you do your inheritance, make sure that the is a relationship makes sense. In this case, it doesn't. The last bullet is quite important because they talk about multi-inheritance and single inheritance. Java is a single inheritance programming language. Other languages may be, you can and so on, multiple inheritance languages, which means that in Java you can only inherit from one superclass. The subclass can only have one superclass, not a list of superclasses. All right, then the 3 questions following on to the information, important that you have the background knowledge. Then about the super keyword, the key point in each paragraph indicates the important concept that will be dealt with in each paragraph. In this case, methods and constructors of the superclass. In a subclass, you use the super keyword to refer to the superclass. If we go a bit down, you will read as well. It refers to calling constructors. Important here is that a subclass, this sentence here is quite critical because a subclass inherits accessible data fields and methods from its superclass. It does not inherit constructors. It cannot inherit constructors. Therefore, you need a way to call the constructor to do that from your subclass. You use the super keyword for that. If we can look at an example, here they tell you, we'll look at the example in a minute. Here they say a constructor is used to construct an instance of a class. Unlike products of a superclass are not inherited by the subclass. You inherit everything else but not the constructor. The constructor must be executed. It's executed by either using the super keyword, or it's executed by default, which we'll explain in the next video. So here the syntax for calling the constructor of the super class is super. Without, you are calling the default constructor from the super class. Here you are calling the constructor in the super class with the parameter list. The example they explain here is the one we already talked about, the circle and the geometric superclass. I've got another version of the textbook open on the left hand side just to refer to our previous example. If you can recall subclass, the circle one, we have a constructor for the circle object. In that constructor, we assigned radius to the local data field, but then we called the superclass method setColor to assign the color to the superclass data field. Over here, setColor from the subclass, it jumps to the setColor method in the superclass. It brings along the color, and in this method, it assigns the color to the data field of the superclass. So you can, even though you don't have access to the color data field in the superclass, you can use the setColor method to set class data field. Here we see the example. So this is one way of assigning values to a private data field in the superclass. Another way to do that is to make use of your super keyword. Here we have the same over here with its constructor with a radius, a color, and the Boolean field. On the next page, you'll see the call. We call, instead of calling the set methods as we did before, we now call a constructor from that's situated in the superclass. So we say super, so jump to one of the constructors in the superclass, take with you the color and field. That statement will take us to the superclass of the over here, simple geometric superclass. Over here is the constructor. It receives the color and field. That is what we are communicating with color and field. So this specific, but remember this constructor sits in the superclass, and it will, when it executes this constructor, it will assign whatever color has arrived here to the local data field, and whatever field value has arrived here to the field data field. So when you need to assign values to the superclass data fields, which are private, you can either use the set methods from your constructor in your subclass. You can call the two set methods, or you can call the constructor. The constructor will then assign the values to the data fields. So here's an example of the calling the constructor. This keyword will in other programs we've done already. This dot will assign the radius to the local subclass data field.